photography and other people in the arts to discuss the future of our practice. In the future, I probably will change this department with my colleagues to something called the lens and screen arts, and that seems to encompass what we're about tonight. Roxana Marcoci is the curator of photography at the Museum of Modern Art. She has curated any number of recent shows, including the current show that we are going to discuss. Thomas de Man, Olaf Eliasson, the list goes on and on. She has a wonderful recent essay from Face to Mask, Collage, Montage, and Assembly in Contemporary Portraiture, an issue very pertinent to all of our photographic practice as well. And she's going to be our moderator tonight and hopefully interact not only with our discussees and discussants, but with you as an audience. Robin Rhode is a young South African now living in Berlin. I'm shocked at how young he is, 2 kids and a wonderful family, who has what seems to me a very long and a distinguished career. His recent monograph was published by Heidi Kranch, Walk Off. He is an interdisciplinary, multimedia, performance, drawing, film, and photography artist. All the things that should come together and also should fight with each other whenever they need to. He's had many wonderful exhibitions throughout all the major museums that you can think of, but also very interesting, he collaborated with a pianist on doing a performance and piece on Mussorgsky's pictures at an exhibition, which has gone to a number of performative spaces throughout the world. And finally, Eleanor Antin, a artist that has been on the scene for as long as I've been on the scene. We're about the same age, I think. I first came in contact with Eleanor's sepia tone pictures sometime back in the 70s. I think it was called Nightingale. She recently was awarded a Doctor of Arts from one of my places of study and practice, the School of the Art Institute. She's written 5 books, produced plays, performance pieces. She is a pioneer of performative art and a videographer and filmmaker as well, I understand. So with no further ado, Roxana.
Good evening. It is a pleasure to be here tonight with you all, and an honor to share the platform with the distinguished artists Eleanor Antin and Robin Rhode, both featured in the exhibition The Original Copy, Photography of Sculpture 1839 to Today, currently on view at the Museum of Modern Art. I would like first to thank Beatrice Gross, who is an independent curator and actually former MoMA colleague, who first approached me with the idea of organizing such a panel and actually bringing artists of different generations together, and also to extend my appreciation to Charles Trop, chair of the MFA Photography, Video, and Related Media Department at the School of Visual Arts for hosting this event tonight. The original copy, which I hope you will all have the chance to see, it's still on view at MoMA until Monday. Is an exhibition that actually examines the legacy of photography's 170-year history through an analysis of another medium, in this case, sculpture. Conceived around 10 conceptual modules, the exhibition brings together over 300 pictures by 100 modern avant-garde and contemporary artists. Tonight, I would like to focus just on one section out of the 10, and the images that you will see here in this PowerPoint presentation are really excerpted all from that section, which is titled The Performing Body, a Sculptural Object, to probe the critical role photography has played in redefining what sculpture is by bringing into play original and reproduction, live event and post-mortem document, sculptural object and performing subject. Throughout the 20th century, artists engaged with Dada happenings, fluxus, actionism, and other types of participatory art have relied on photographic, video, film, and more recently, electronic reproduction. While performances have been experienced live in the present tense, as manifested in happenings of the late 1950s and early 60s, which were for the most part unscripted, ad hoc, and ephemeral, what constitutes the document is the photograph. But the document is also a manifestation of the work itself. In this case, from top left in clockwise movement, Robert Whitman, photographed by Robert McElroy in Flower of 1963. Red Grooms, photographed by Max Baker in The Burning Building of 1959. Robert Whitman, photographed by Michael Asher in Water of 1963, and Jim Dine, photographed by McElroy in The Car Crash of 1960. In all these happenings, with an audience present, the photographers carefully compose their images, moving in close proximity to the performers, focusing on framing and defining a specific gesture, the body's weight and its materiality. The pictures here serve as prime source material to understand the distinctive happening after it was passed. They constitute the truly original copy, the thing that was intended to survive. And it is these images alone that originate our response today. Photography thus plays a constitutive, not merely documentary role, and this is especially true when performances are staged expressly for the camera. To give you an example, as early as 1915, in an explicit eulogy to futurism credo of dynamism as breathing force, the artist Fortunato De Pero recorded his cynical laugh, excessive facial expressions, and explosive attitude towards the lens in a series of self-portraits that transformed photography from document to photo performance. In 1920, the lovingly Rose C'est la vie emerged in a series of photographs that Man Ray took of his friend Marcel Duchamp in drag. An elusive character, Rose effectively replaced Duchamp as author of several Dada artworks, which she signed in her own name. Enacting androgyny and dandyism in the tradition of performance work, the artist's impersonations before the camera led a year later to him shaving the hair on the back of his head into a five-pointed star with an elongated tail like a comet. Titled Tonsure, this emblematic self-portrait was consciously constructed with a photographic reference in mind. The chronological proximity of Tonsure to Man's Ray's pictures of the artist in drag suggests that in the flux of Duchamp's expatriation to the United States, after World War I was declared in 1914, actually Duchamp decided to immigrate to then a neutral United States. He was also contemplating a change of identity, only to realize to his surprise that when he arrived to New York, he was already a celebrity. The star image of Tonsure played out the idea of Duchamp converting himself into a cult object. With this playful Dada gesture, Duchamp articulated photography as performance and the body as sculptural material. The plastic representation of the artist's body during the 1920s paved the way towards strategies successfully explored in performances conceived for the camera in the 1960s and 70s. It was after seeing Duchamp's retrospective at the Pasadena Art Museum in 1963 that Bruce Nauman took a series of photographs of himself enacting simple, task-like exercises in his studio. Collectively, the images came to be known as 11-color photographs. In the pictures, Nauman enacts puns and wordplay to generate a series of activities. Waxing hot, the artist's hands polish a bright red sculpture of the word hot. Bound to fail, the artist's torso, seen from behind, is tethered with a thick rope in reference to his sculptural relief, Henry Moore, Bound to Fail. And Feet of Clay, the artist's feet are slathered with a soft brown clay, spoofing the classical tradition of sculpture. Each picture combines sculptural form, linguistic content, physical behavior, and photographic staging. The signature image of the group, self-portrait as a fountain in which a stripped to the waist Naumann spews water from his mouth, is a deadpan salute to Duchamp's ready-made fountain. 11 color photographs establishes Naumann's lasting engagement with the body as sculptural object. A year later, in 1968, Naumann would expand these ideas to video in Walk with Contrapposto, in which he paced back and forth along a narrow corridor, his hands behind his head, his torso twisting off-axis from his hips, a pose in classical sculptural tradition of Praxiteles. Turning the camera on himself, Naumann altered his body into a sculpture that is at once humorous and illogical. What links the Dutch artist Bastiaan Adder's practice to Naumann's is a preoccupation with the absurd. In a 4-picture sequence titled On the Road to a New Neoplasticism, Westkapelle, Holland of 1971, Adler, dressed in black, lies in the middle of a cobbled road leading to the lighthouse in Westkapelle, a frequent subject of Piet Mondrian's early works. The first frame shows only the artist. In the second, he is lying on a square blue blanket. In the third, a yellow plastic gasoline can appears in the top left corner, and the fourth adds a red box. Playing with primary colors and with the simplified geometry of vertical and horizontal lines, and photographing himself as a debased sculptural object, others satirize the utopian ideal of harmony associated with the Stil, the classic modernism of his native Holland, as illustrated in this Gerrit Rietveld chair from circa 1923. This expanded sense of sculptural practice with the body at its center was fundamental to other artists, including the duo Gilbert and George. In 1969, the artists covered their hands and heads in metallic powders to sing Flanagan and Allen's vaudeville number Underneath the Arches in live performance. Despite the success of their public presentation, the artists found that experience limiting and began using photography and film as their prime means of expression. Declaring themselves living sculptures, they claimed the status of an artwork, a role they used photography to express, as defined in this close-up portrait of them enacting Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. Gilbert and George used photography to explore different social classes and to capture both exalted and debased states of epiphany. Think of inebriation. In their celebrated drinking sculpture series, the artists collaged in one frame occasion of drunkenness that at once propagated an image of Britain and attacked its conventions. Like Gilbert and George, Anna Mendieta experimented with the camera to extend performance into living sculpture in the series of pictures that she executed at Yagul in Oaxaca, Mexico. Here, Mendieta covered her body with flowered grass, rocks, and mud, combining ancient Mesoamerican rituals with contemporary earth art and performance. The pictures were taken in collaboration with her teacher, Hans Breder, who founded the Intermedia program at the University of Iowa in 1968, where Mendieta studied. The idea that the artist can in effect stand in for the artwork proved instrumental in broadening the definition of sculptural practice. Valley Export, Dennis Oppenheim, and Charles Ray, placing a premium on their training as sculptors, articulated the body as a prop that could be picked up, bent, and deployed instead of more traditional materials as a system of weight, mass, and balance. In plank piece 1 and 2 of 73, Ray hung limply from a plank wedged diagonally against the wall. And in Parallel Stress of 1970, Oppenheim performed two actions, void of drama, yet obdurate in their physicality. First, defying the pull of gravity, he stretched his body like a bridge between two parallel brick walls, a position he held for 10 minutes. Next, he lay prostrate inside a large V-shaped concavity between two mounds of earth, his body flexing to conform to the shape of the slopes. A self-proclaimed feminist expert subjected her body to actions designed to defy the conformist culture of her native Austria. Working in Vienna in the post-World War II period, alongside actionist artists, principally Günter Bruss, who you see here, but also Otto Mühl, Hermann Nitsch, and Rudolf Schwarzkogler, who emerged there in the 1960s, she, like them, enlisted photography to register the psychological effects of the natural and social environments. In the body configuration series of the early 1970s, expert used her body as a measuring and pointing device, lying down inside a narrow ditch, conforming to the angle of a corner, pressing against a wall or encircling the curve of a curb. Most of the pictures are accentuated with black or red lines, either produced in the darkroom or added in ink to the print. The artificial match among the architectural structures, the geometric lines applied to the photographs, and the figure's uneasy gymnastics emphasize the dissension between the individual and the ideological forces that shape social reality. Other artists, including Yves Klein and Claes Oldenburg, have also experimented with the body as sculptural medium. In 1960, in Paris, dressed in a three-piece suit, an aeronautical Klein jumped from a second-story window to the ground. Accounts conflict as to whether he made his leap with or without a net, and the action, in fact, had no audience. It was staged for a photograph taken by Harry Schank, the photographer with whom Klein worked. Schank actually shot not one, but two pictures. One was taken with a net beneath the airborne artist, the other a few moments later from the same angle but with the net removed to show an empty street. Schank then montaged the upper half of one picture with the lower half of the other in the darkroom to capture Klein's famous leap into the void. The photographer Janos Kender, who worked with Schank from around 1957 to 73, appears in the picture on a bicycle. The picture was published in a kind of a one-day newspaper, Dimanche, le journal d'un seul jour, on Sunday, November 27, 1960, and sold on newsstands throughout the city. In the case of Robert Morris, his introduction to the plasticity of the body came through his affiliation with the Judson Dance Theater and a group of New York choreographers, including Simone Forti, his wife in the late 1950s, Trisha Brown, and Yvonne Reiner, who opposed the conventions of theatrical dance to investigate the body's ordinary, matter-of-fact movements and positions, as seen in this photograph taken by Babette Mangolte. Its scale based on the human body, Morris's eye box is a full-length nude photograph of himself set in a minimalist box with a hinged eye-shaped door. Morris proposed a mode of meaning for sculpture and performance that corresponded closely to that of the photograph, a mode in which the physical self is at once encoded by the camera and treated as an uninflected sculptural object in space. In the radicalized climate of the early 1970s, when the women's liberation movement took center stage, influential artists such as Eleanor Antin and Hannah Wilke refigured their bodies in the spirit of activism to comment on the power structure of gender difference. The idea that the camera can at once extend a sculptural activity into performance and the performance into sculpture is pointedly expressed in Antin's Carving, a traditional sculpture of 1972, a series of full-length shots installed in grid formation showing the artist's body from the front, back, and sides over a 36-day period in which she sculpted herself by dieting to lose 10 pounds in weight. In Carving, and its abridged version titled The Last 7 Days, Antin strategically played with and corrupted the traditional process of classical sculptors, who in finding perfect form chipped away at a block of stone until they had discarded any unnecessary material, and at the same time displayed the reductive measure of minimalist sculptors who represented a culture dominant at the time. Her feminist perspective taps directly on the subjects of transformation and identity. This photographic piece establishes a critical link with her other constructions of alter egos, personas, and alternative identities through the personification of famous characters, both factual and fictional, and I hope Eleanor will elaborate on these aspects in her own presentation. Exploring the idea that photography could make an action outlive the moment, some artists even reenacted their public presentation once again in the absence of an audience, specifically in front of the photographic lens. In 1982, Hannah Wilke staged for the camera performances she had first presented publicly in 1974. In these appearances, she handed a variety of colored chewing gum to the audience. Then she stripped. Once the audience chewed the gum, she asked for it back, twisting each piece into sculptural forms that resembled wounds, or as she called them, cunts, which she applied to her body. She called these performalist self-portraits. In SOS Starification Object series, Wilke hired a commercial photographer to shoot the poses she enacted. She posed like a mannequin, wearing sunglasses and a cowboy hat, turning her back sensually or with her hair in curlers. Her naked flesh scarred with the labia-shaped chewing gum sculptures. Wilke's portrayal as a stigmatized star in SOS underscores the key role photography plays in the intersection of performance and sculpture. In recent years, artists have continued to use the camera to act out symbolic and concrete gestures of political dissent. Engaged with the incorporation of performance principles into photography, Robin Rhode, for instance, has tapped his familiarity with the rough, segregated neighborhoods of Cape Town and Johannesburg, where he grew up, to address aspects of the troubled South African landscape in the post-apartheid age. Consider Stone Flag of 2004, a sequence of pictures shot from a single bird's eye viewpoint in simulated stop action. It shows the artist apparently wielding a flag, actually a sculpture of red clay bricks, which he seems to bend into the wind in an ode to his nation's newfound democracy. His stark white boiler suit was initially designed for a dance show, a collaboration with the rap group Black Noise in 2001, in which performers threw handfuls of charcoal dust on the floor, slowly becoming smeared with dust themselves. Rhode's outfit relates the subcultural codes of urban youth culture to an economy of difference, a meditation on the nature of national representation that extends into questions of personal identity. Stone Flag is a work in which photography acts as constitutive agent. Distinct generation of artists, from Marcel Duchamp to Bruce Nauman, from Yves Klein to Charles Ray, and from Eleanor Antin to Robin Rhode, have manipulated, expanded, and diversified the creative and critical possibilities of performance through photography to probe what sculpture is, as well as the ways in which sculptures has socially and politically engaged not one, but a broad spectrum of expressions. Thank you. And now I would like to invite Eleanor to the podium.
I have to stand out here because I'm so small. It's actually, tell me if you have any trouble hearing me, please. It was actually quite moving for me to hear Roxana go through these works and to see them, because I lived through them. And there's a patina now of the wit and the beauty and the cleverness and the importance and the classicism of so much of this work. But you know, it didn't feel that way then. It was war. And I've just finished a memoir, a written memoir, a book, which is called Conversations with Stalin, Memoirs of a Red Diaper Confessions of a Red Diaper Baby. And my agent asked me, could I, since it ends, the timing isn't consecutive, but it ends sort of around my early 20s. And it's mostly my childhood and my adolescence. And she said, could you sort of do like maybe a couple of chapters about the art world? and your life in it, because actually it's been more than 40 years of my life in that world. And I realized there is no way I can follow my childhood, and I mean, dark as much of it was, hilarious as much of it was, because the voice would have to be different once I really was seriously involved in the art world, because all of these works were a battle, okay? And I'm going to show you just a few works that will, and tell you some of the stories, some of the battles that went through what now looks so benign and, you know, charming and witty and well-known. Let me start with, okay, a piece which most people find rather lovable, My 100 Boots. It started when I moved to California a couple of years from there, and I was going back to New York, actually working, doing portraits of people with brand new consumer goods. And I decided I couldn't stand this, traveling back and forth. And I was going to do a piece through the mails, and I needed a hero. So I thought of a kind of beat hero, 100 boots. I bought 100 boots. 50 pairs. In those days, it was $200 at the Army Navy surplus store. And went through a period of about 2.5 years when I had them travel to various places in Southern California, then mailed them out as postcards to about 1,000 artists, dancers, poets, whatever in the art world. I'll show you, it was interrupted. It turned into a narrative, okay, a kind of beat picaresque novel in my picture novel, a photonovella, and it took place in real time where people got them in their real mailbox. I'll show you one adventure, which took about, I think, 4 months or 3.5 months to play. Okay, that was 100 Boots Faces the Sea, the first one. A few weeks later, 100 Boots Go to Church. 100 Boots at the Bank. They're doing very nice suburban things. 100 Boots in the Market. Just turned it a little on its edge so it looks like a musical. 100 Boots, I can't remember what this one's called. Yeah, but, well, whatever it is, this was they used to have, drive-in. They used to have these drive-ins. Actually, this one played porny movies at night. 100 Boots Circling, I believe. There's about 2 weeks in between mixed up. 100 Boots Turn the Corner. A little bit of angst is coming in. 100 Boots Trespass. You can see I climbed over and put them in. 3 days later, I sent 100 Boots on the Road, I think. I really don't remember the name too well. And they had to run away. They just committed a crime. And then 100 Boots in a Meadow, and then started another adventure. Okay, so these, if one of the definitions of sculpture is that you can fall over it, these were, or in this case, you can wear them. These boots were solid objects in space. They became a kind of heroic hero, somewhat absurd, sometimes heroic, sometimes romantic, sometimes dumb, through photography, and then in this long played-out narrative. All right. Now, I always knew in those days we were very concerned with all these works that everyone's willing to call art now. Everyone was very concerned with making sure that something is art. What is art? This is art. Well, the rest of the art world, the establishment art world, did not accept all of this as art. So I knew that this work, 100 Boots, after 51 cards, which I planned, was going to be disseminated throughout the art world, that it would have to enter a museum to officially become art. Somehow I had the idea that it would be the Whitney that would ask me, but it turned out to be MoMA, which was a great surprise. But I couldn't do it right away because we had to play out all the actions. But then we made a date, and it was arranged, and I would bring the boots in. And in those days, they didn't have installations. So, but I knew that the boots had to come and be there, along with their cards, and along with a New York adventure of larger images, because the cards are what you can get through with a first class, postage for a postcard, and which, by the way, was 6 cents in those days, and changed to 8 cents in the middle, I came in, we shot the boots around the city. MoMA, it was wonderful. The plan was that they were going to mail out of the 20-some images that I shot in New York. I picked 5, and each week of the 5-week show, they were going to mail each of those cards out to my mailing list, which was pretty terrific because I was having to do this myself before the days of computer by hand, okay? Because so many people would ask to be in it. Other people would say, stop, harassing my mailbox. I'd have to take them off. It was a lot that was done by hand. Okay, I'm coming in about a week before we're all set to come in, and I get a call, actually, Barbara, I forgot the name of the young curator who was there, and she was working with Kynaston McShine, and they had arranged for the show, and she called, or Kynaston, I don't remember who, called to say, we have a problem. We have a problem because they're afraid that people will walk off. No, before that, there was the first problem. Okay, the first problem is, what's his name? Who was the head of photography? Yeah, Sarkovsky. He said this is his domain, and it was painting and sculpture that was doing it. This belongs to him. He wouldn't show it if his life depended on it. It sucks. However, painting and sculpture cannot show it because it is not theirs. So they said, what do we do? I said, I don't know. And they said, all right, we'll take it to Bill Rubin, who was the sort of eminence grise of painting and sculpture. And they took it to Bill Rubin. Bill Rubin had been on my mailing list, along with everybody else. And he said, oh, it's conceptual art. It belongs to painting and sculpture. Okay, that was settled. And Sarkovsky was sent on his way. Okay. Then 3 days later, I got another call. We have another problem. They're afraid you were going to leave the boots around the galleries. There were 3 rooms for the show. You're going to leave the boots around the galleries. Well, they're afraid that someone's going to steal a boot. I said, steal a boot. These are big men's boots. 9, 10, size 11, size 12. You can't steal it. What are you going to do, put it in your pocket? And they said, it doesn't matter. The registrar, they're freaked out. There is no way. So we have a way of doing it. We're going to nail them to the floor. And I said, you're what? You're going to crucify my boots? And I got into, I think I got into an anxiety attack. No way. I said, we're not coming. That I knew. Now, I was a young artist, okay? This was a big deal for me. No way are you going to nail my boots. So Kynaston said, all right, well, think of something. And then, which happens sometimes, as all artists know, sometimes necessity is really the mother of invention, and it was a wonderful idea because then I invented a real installation instead of just these boots hanging around, because that would be a lot of rubber. That's all that they look like. But it had to be safe. Nobody could steal them, right? So we brought in a city door. Those are the times New York was being rebuilt, so it was being destroyed all over. And they used to have these doors around the pit where the old building was. And we stole, me and some of the other the guys who worked at the museum in the installation department, we stole a door, an apartment door, and we made a room for them. We had all the booths there with old mattresses, beer bottles, cards, an old sink that was really dirty little sink that was attached to the wall. It was kind of furnished room green. It was kind of pretty measly color with a light hanging down, on the ceiling. But you could only see this much because in those days there was total paranoia that you were, like everybody had about 5 different kinds of chain locks all over the place. So we had the chain locks. Maybe a little child could squeeze a little face inside, but basically everybody else could only see maybe about 10, 12 booths. There's also a radio going on playing some country western. And they retained a kind of magic. Okay, so that problem worked out well. But it wasn't easy, okay? Then let me go on to the next, I could go on about this work and all the problems. Okay, let's take carving, a traditional sculpture, again, a problem with the museum. Just after I finished 100 booths, the Whitney did call me, and the Whitney said, we're having our biannual, and it is the sculpture biannual. Very few people know that in those days, every 2 years, I guess, they would have a biannual, and 1 year it was sculpture, and 2 years later, it was painting. And in fact, just shortly before they had ended this rule that was a rule in the contract of the Whitney that they could never have photography. Photography was not allowed to show in the Whitney, but that law that rule had been ended, I believe. So they called me and they said, we'd like you to do a piece for the sculpture biannual. So I said, I thought about it, and I didn't want to do any more. I was going to do a March on Washington for the Corcoran, all sorts of things. I'd had it. It was a terrible job, a lot of work. The booths, I didn't want to know from them anymore. And I thought, okay, I'll do a sculpture for the Whitney, which, since they were doing a sculpture biannual, seemed to me a rather traditional museum. And so I would do a traditional sculpture. So I lost weight. That was explained so well by Roxana. I'm not going to do it now. And over 36 days, you might say that I reached the ideal form that was, as Michelangelo said once, you can only do to the marble what is really inherent in the marble. And I reached what I think was probably the ideal form that was inherent in my flesh, in my marble. And I sent off this plan, this scenario, to Marcia Tucker, who was the curator, and I believe Helene Weiner, who was her assistant curator. And I'm a terrible gossip. I give people's names when I remember them. And because I think we have to remember these things. And I thought, and also it reads as a movie. It's kind of Muybridge-like, but you read it as a movie. You start with the first day, and you see, and the scale weights on the bottom, and you can slowly see the slow motion movie as I start to reach my perfect proportions. And I got a letter back, I believe from Helene Weiner, saying, this is a very nice piece, Eleanor, but it's not sculpture, it's conceptual art. Conceptual art had saved me the first time just a few weeks before, but it was not about to save me now. And I said, okay. And then I showed it in LA in a show, a little while, a couple months later. It was never shown in New York until, let's see, this is 72, about 28 years later, they were doing their Millennium Show, 2000, I guess it was called. And I got a call from this young curator saying, surfers, I found that when I went out, and very rarely with a camera, I went out with Fel Steinmetz, very rare. I would say, okay, I'm gonna go sit with these people, or I'm gonna go talk to these people, and when you get a wink from me, you start shooting. Now, you can do that, even though he would go like this. Well, he had a little hole here, and he would go like that. But so they didn't see him. But very rarely did I think twice, 2 days. But basically over a 2-year period, I went out to see my people. And actually, it was interesting, as I'm this walking sculptural artwork, whatever, I found that the kids, like these kids, were very, very friendly and open. And sometimes they say, oh, hi, there's the king, hi. And I would chat with them. And I think because they were stoned out of their minds, they didn't know what I looked like because, I had breasts and, and a beard. And then the very old people, and I think now that I'm getting older, I think what happened is they didn't see too well. So they were very friendly. And all the other people I was an embarrassment. They would make believe they didn't see me, okay? And it was really like an effort because people they have good manners, they're polite, they don't want to be rude. And this odd whatever is walking by them. Okay, then let me just, I knew it, I was going to go on for 10 minutes, Roxanne, I'm very sorry. Okay, I just want to show you I'm showing you a couple of older works, and then I'm going to show you a couple of my most recent stuff. The reason I want to show this is because it's a difference I'm surprised that we didn't have any video in this show. Because I found it very interesting, the different truths of the moving camera and the different truths of the still camera. And this is a piece called Caught in the Act, which has a videotape and a number of stills. And in the videotape, you can see the photo session in which I trained myself to be a ballerina, but I can't really stand on point without holding on. So there's a character called Help who passes me a broomstick, well, the edge of a broomstick. We took the broom part off. And then I would get into position, and, it was very pretty piano music, Chopin. And then I would say Help. Help would put out the stick, and I would hold on, and then I'd say, now, as I'm on the point, and just before I collapse, the still camera gets it. Okay, now you see they are ideally shown together with the moving camera showing the truth, but that's only one truth. The still camera was true for that, what is it, 1/200th of a second? I don't know, for this tiny little moment. That was true, and I was a ballerina. So I thought, I really don't draw the distinction. I mean, a camera is a camera. They have great distinctions, but I think that there are strong relations, and I would have liked seeing some video in this show. Okay, now we are skipping many, many years, okay? This one I think is from 2001. Okay. I'm going to show you 3 of these pictures. These are very, very large photographs, really large, of one of my great loves was ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Now, this is from the last days of Pompeii, and it's the artist studio. And what happened is I realized that through a number of realizations, that the Southern California, where I live, La Jolla, where I don't live, but what I was driving down towards when I got this aperçu, you might call it, was very much, my whole country was very much like ancient Rome. That we were an empire, and colonizing everybody, or whoever we could, whoever we didn't have to colonize with our presence, we certainly colonized with our culture. And also, California is on the verge of probably everything but a tsunami. And even a tsunami, if there's an earthquake about a mile off, we'll have a tsunami. California, if you turn off the hoses, Southern California, you'd have a desert. As David, my husband, says, it used to support 26 Indians badly in the San Diego area. So I realized I like this rhyme between the United States and my world of Southern California with Rome. But what style? Well, I'm near Hollywood. Obviously, they're big on, what do they call it? Those sort of like, I forgot, the Roman movies, there's a kind of word that the industry has for them. And sandals and something. And at the same time, I needed a style that would fit besides the movies, and I realized that we were very much like 19th century France, England, whatever. They saw themselves as the new Romans. They were the new conquerors of the world. They were colonizing everybody, Africa, Asia, wherever, and that I decided that the salon style of the painting of the French salon period, that would have been a perfect style when they saw themselves as the new Romans. So this is the style which I try to approximate that with a kind of marriage with movies. Now this is the artist studio, in which the artist is obviously using a woman in a traditional way as muse for model for the sculpture. Now that's a 19th century sculpture, it's a replica. And this is it was a 21st century girl, California girl. She's actually a belly dancer. And there was no way I could make her body approximate that sculpture. She could get into position, and she does, but if you notice, the sculpture has a slightly supine sort of offering tone to it. There is no way that this girl, and she tried, could do that. Her athletic California body couldn't do it, which is very interesting. You know, if you like to look at 19th century movies, you always see how the actors really don't look like 19th century actors. My friend Ellen Zweig was pointing that up when we were discussing that yesterday. They really don't. Even when they want to do the 30s, they look different. No matter how many, like I forgot the program that's the 50s on, everyone thinks that looks like the 50s on television. Forget it, I lived through the 50s. That doesn't look like the 50s at all. The people don't look like the 50s. Doesn't matter what you do to their hair or what clothes you put on them. Okay, now, so I always like that lack of perfect fit. And it's a Roman sculpture, obviously. And this one is called The Lovers. By the way, it's not supposed to have white. I bleed it to the edge. I can't bear these white mats. This is just in the, I don't know, for some reason that's how they were taken. They're originally from, I think they're from slides originally. Okay, this is just to give you an idea of some of the allegorical properties. By the way, you see the sculpture over there. She's a person who we marbleized to be a sculpture. And she's flirting with a lover. This one is not from the last days of Pompeii. This one is from Roman allegories. The lover is smoking a cigarette, leaning against a column. They're both flirting together. Columbine, the dancer, these are the characters, my Commedia dell'arte figures that are roaming throughout this Roman Southern California landscape in this work of, I think there are 12 images. And she's looking daggers at him. The little girl, who is also part of the traveling group, they're kind of a motley crew, she's eating an apple. Obviously, we all know what an apple means in the way of knowledge. And then there's two elderly senators walking off into the bushes, hand in hand. down below is one of our big highways, which you can vaguely see. Okay, and this is from the last one I'll show you. It's from the last one, which is Helen's Odyssey. And I don't even remember, I think it's called The Invention of Helen, but I think it's pretty obvious what's happening. We have the sleeping female, magnificent figure. The sculptors are all, is in a 19th century sculpture setting. They're putting together and creating this, at the moment, sleeping figure who then will get up and do their bidding. As a sculpture, it won't, but it will have the life of an artwork. And it relates back to carving in some ways, which is why I wanted to show it. Okay, I think, yes, and I have trouble with these too. I'm at war with the art world because, all right, maybe someone wants to ask me about this later, but I was blamed all the time when we were looking, when we were doing, everyone was doing performances and all of these other works, and I was doing performances. My performances were theater, pure theater, and my invented theater, and that was a dirty word, so in those cases I was also at war, but I don't want to talk about that so much now. I'm finished.
Thank you very much. My name is Robin Rhode. I was born in South Africa. I'm now living and working in Berlin, as Charles mentioned early on. Also, Charles mentioned that I'm young, and I remember a quote that I heard once on youth, and the quote says, I'm not young enough to know everything. So I wish I was much younger than what I am. I think this is a really great context for me to give this talk because I always like to talk from the context of a student, meaning the context of my youth and the impact of my youth in South Africa and how that somehow led to my artistic language. Also, when Eleanor began speaking, she mentioned the word battle, which I think is very important because, you know, if there's no conflict, if there's no struggle, I think that it's very difficult for the artist to eventually reach a point in their practice which is somehow essentialized but also meaningful. So there has to be this internal battle that you have with the artistic process leading up to the realization of the work of art. So just going back to the context, being the School of Visual Arts and my struggle as a student living in South Africa, you know, I can clearly recall being, you know, a troublesome student, and the reason for that is because, you know, I really, you know, being one of the very few students of color in the art faculty, I really struggled to find my own kind of inherent or authentic artistic language, and it was a real battle for me. You know, being in South Africa, you are so distant from the kind of Western canon that is so much part of the artistic discourse. So I had to somehow develop and discover my own kind of authentic language as a young artist. And I remember, you know, as a student going to see the second Johannesburg Biennale in 1997. And it was so funny that it's so strange now that even though I'm included on the show at MoMA, I remember clearly being inspired by the earlier works of Dennis Oppenheim. So being a student and seeing the works of Dennis Oppenheim led me to investigate and research performance art history. And I remember clearly, you know, again, Marcel Duchamp being a direct influence. And I remember this the bicycle wheel of Duchamp, clearly, or the early pieces of Vittorio Conci, which I also found very interesting. So the notion of the body was very much part of my early formative ideas as a young artist. So after researching a lot of art history, something just kind of struck in me, and this was a moment I had in my youth, in high school. And this was a really, really interesting moment because, being a student, I was again trying to ask myself this question: what is my authentic language? And I remember this, and through my art history research, I somehow, it led me back to my youth as a school kid, right? And there was this very funny kind of, I think you call it hazing, situation we had in high school where we would actually, when the young pupils or the young students came into the high school, we would haze them by forcing the young boys into the boys' toilets, and we would steal the white chalk from the classroom, and we would draw very rudimentary objects on the walls of the toilet, and then force the young boys to interact with these very crude-like drawings. And one of the first objects we would always draw is the bicycle. So we would draw a bike on the wall, and we'd force this young kid to ride the bike. Or we would draw a candle on the wall and ask this young boy to blow out the flame. So all these moments were coming back to me as a student. I was like, wait, this is really interesting because this moment that I had, this I would say authentic experience, that was so much ingrained in my life, somehow was embedded with art history because the bicycle was present, the bicycle going back to Duchamp. There was this performative aspect which, touched on performance art pieces from the 60s and 70s. I can just mention Vittorio Conci as one artist, or Dennis Oppenheim, that I can recall. But this kind of really playful, provocative, maybe dark high school experience, also funny experience, somehow triggered my artistic language. And since then I've been developing my work from that moment. So for me it's really important as a young artist or as an emerging artist to always mention this kind of experience that I had as a student, struggling to find my own artistic voice, and then having to go back into my youth to find a personal experience which then became this kind of light. And it's something, I've been doing the same thing ever since. So I still do a bit of hazing now and again. I'll speak to you about a current work that I've just completed this year. So the notion of drawing was very important, and with regards to performance and with regards to the object or the sculpture, I'm also intrigued by the idea of replacing the object with the drawing. Okay, so the drawing leads to the object, and now I'm saying I want to take the object back into a very centralized drawing form. This piece is titled X, and I was very recently. I've been very interested in notions of architecture and space. Again, notion of architecture relating to the physical experience that we have in interior or exterior space. And I was very intrigued by the form of the Barcelona chair by Mies van der Rohe. And I decided to replicate this form of this chair, this very well-known architectural influenced object, in the form of an X, since the chair itself is using the X as a starting point. So the X becomes infinitive. Okay. And I decided to develop my own theory of what the infinity could become. So here I'm starting with an X. And just again to go back to South Africa, you know, I'm an artist that always prefers to work in an exterior situation. And again, going back to my student position, I had no choice as a student but to embrace working in the public realm. And the public was very important for me because it was a way for me to somehow reverse the role of the audience. I was somehow interested in shifting away from the white cube or the planned atmosphere of the studio to somehow take more chances in the public realm, and to therefore allow the day-to-day public, people, you know, going to work, people, you know, getting off a taxi or off a bus, to then become surprised or to become a new audience, or to become part of the process in the realization of an artwork. So I guess working in the public realm for me with performance was a very much a kind of a political position that I took in South Africa at the time. And I used a lot of photography as a process of documenting these kind of interactions. So again, yeah, I'm in an exterior situation. I'm in a public space, and I'm trying to solve X or the infinitive. So the chair here becomes a very centralized structure. It's very flat, two-dimensional. However, the two-dimensional evokes the object or the sculpture or the chair. The reason why I'm so intrigued by chairs is because, you know, I like objects that have a close proximity to the body. So chairs, tables, you know, things that are around us, somehow become extensions of ourselves, but also extensions of our physical being. So a chair was a very, how can I say, a very easy kind of object to start working with. And I also tend to work in series. Here I try to allow the chair to then project itself into space with this character somehow controlling the drawing, as if he was drawing in that moment. As the work develops, I'm trying to again allow the chair to also become an abstract entity. So the X becomes something abstract. So as you can see, I made a very rough sketch before I started before I started doing the work, and you know, I just came up with a very simple equation. I said, okay, X is equal to a square, being the format of the camera, of the film, square plus a triangle. So it was my idea to somehow create a pyramid within this kind of very square format. So I tried to evoke the kind of squareness of the medium of photography, but at the same time I was trying to look at how the square could then reflect this notion of infinity, being the X, and then to try and place a triangle inside that square. So, and this became the work became a way for me to somehow come up with my own mathematical formula. You know, as artists, we can get away with, you know, any kind of formula. This is another piece, a very recent piece of mine called Requiem for a Pavilion of Silence. And it was very interesting as well when Roxana was speaking early on that there's a work by Bastian Adder which references Rietveld. And I decided to look at Rietveld again to see how architecture influences our physical space, and also how in the 1920s I was really interested in how like an art movement, or like the still, for example, or this kind of very universal architectural concepts. You know, I'm interested to question notions of Western discourse, like was Mandarin really that universal? I mean, these are questions that I'm asking myself. Did it really impact people's lives in the 1920s? Did it really influence people living on the geographical periphery? How universal was that, and to who was this universal language talking to? So I use my artistic language as a way to somehow deconstruct these kind of Western discourses, and I try and formulate my own meaning to it. I rely on my imagination and my intuition to help me solve these kind of equations. So here I decided to experiment with a very symmetrical chair of Rietveld called a balloon chair. And as you can see on the top left corner, there's this character which comes into frame, and he's using a broom and he's sweeping away. He's sweeping these like a debris or kind of dry branches towards the chair. As he approaches the chair, he uses the broom, and I'm really interested in notions of labor. So, the broom again is interesting because it becomes an extension of the body, becomes an extension of the arm, but at the same time, I think of the broom as a kind of as a brush in which to create a painting. And yet this character, dressed in the former East German army uniform, begins to create with the broom and the template of the balloon chair of Rietveld, a kind of imaginative pavilion, an imaginative piece of architecture. And as this drawing develops, the drawing itself begins to evoke notions of a city space. It becomes completely abstract, and so I'm trying to use notions of geometry in order to evoke geometric abstraction. And in notions or the history of abstract art, I'm trying to question, how great is the influence, and where did it start, and where is it going to? This is a work from 2008. It's called Pan's Opticon. I'm also really interested in notions of optics, and then again using the device of the camera to capture, my kind of investigations into the mechanics of the eye. Here, there's a character in the corner, finds himself in this corner, and and what I've done is that I've used two industrial calipers. Calipers are used on building sites to measure diameter, and I was kind of interested in these questions that I think Duchamp also asked, and which is the notion of the mechanics of looking, and also the ideas of the mechanical erotic. And here I've placed these industrial calipers against the eyelids of this character, who I've named Pan. So he is Pan, this Greek god, and he finds himself in this corner. And for him to escape his reality, the calipers begin to open, and as they open, they lead to this kind of abstract drawing field. So as the calipers widen, so the drawing field widens. And as the calipers then begin to close, such as the mechanics of the eye, so the drawing begins to be sucked in. And the piece concludes with the panel on the right, where all that is left after the eyes open and close are drops of paint, which, as much as it can be dark, it reflects a kind of sadness or the sense of a tear. So, again, looking at notions of architecture, using the panopticon as a reference, and also just the basic, essential role of looking. using the camera as a mechanical device as well as certain kind of objects, sculptural objects like an industrial caliper, for example. And I try to combine that with a kind of physical relationship to the object. It's a piece called Brick Face, 2008, sorry. So again, this idea of trying to replicate an object using a two-dimensional drawing, using drawing as a two-dimensional device. This is a drawing of a sewing machine, and I was interested to see how through investigating physical space and investigating drawing, I'm able to allow the drawing to become functional in allowing me to stitch the wall. So I took a piece of fabric, this kind of negative positive circles on this fabric. I tried to push the fabric through the sewing machine. So the fabric becomes a kind of sculptural volume. And as the fabric passes through the sewing machine, so a kind of geometric drawing is knitted onto the wall. So sometimes I would look at the wall and imagine this idea of a drawing being knitted onto it, like a kind of, the formation of a brick on the wall surface. This is a piece called Pascal's Iron. With this work, I was interested in looking at the surface of a wall, and I remember seeing this very rough wall, and thinking that, or imagining that, I wish I could iron the wall to allow this kind of rough surface to become smooth or to be ironed out. And I began to again look directly at a kind of clothing iron, right? And after studying the form of the iron, I realized that the iron immediately evokes the shape of a triangle. So this piece incorporates again a very simplistic form of an ironing board and the use of a sculptural object being an iron. And if you can see, the wall has a very, very rough surface. And once I had seen the wall and just said, you know what, I love this idea of imagining the possibility of ironing this wall completely clean. And therefore using this. Again, the notion of labor is also very much present in this. The notion of labor in domesticity is very important, I think, in a lot of my works. So this character appears, and he's Pascal. And he begins to iron the wall. And as he begins to iron the wall, so this triangle drawing appears. And as an artist, there's only so much you can control. And I think with photography, what you cannot control when working outside is the notion of light and time. And initially, I was quite concerned with how fast the light was changing, but upon viewing the photographs, I realized, how fascinating it was that all these triangular shadows started appearing within the photograph. With regards to performance, I was really interested in allowing the body to evoke the triangle. So the character has a lot of diagonal, physical poses, so that the body becomes an extension of the drawing, and the drawing becomes as well an extension of the body. Again, you see the shadow coming across the picture surface. And that's the final image. And I think this is how I'd like to conclude my talk. Thank you.
question and answer and dialogue by all of them. So, good chairs.
All right, super. So since we are so late and since you are so good to stay here for a few more minutes, and since we do have two artists whose work is so extremely performative, who involve audiences actually, I think the best thing is to throw the ball to the room and to ask questions. Because, you know, I'll have the chance to chat with them later on, but I think this is the opportunity. Yes, one question there.
Yes, I was interested in Ms. Antin's comment that if it's in a show, then it's art. So is the, I think, the logical equivalent to that, but are you saying that if it could not appear in the show, it would not be art?
Did everyone hear the question? The question is, Eleanor has mentioned that in order for her work, when she was talking about the 100 booths, to really be considered art, because it started as a mail artwork that was sent all around, in order really for the establishment to consider this art, that it was supposed to be shown in a museum. And so the question was whether if it would not have been shown in the museum if it was still art, or if not, why not?
Thank you. It was, I think I said that we were at the time always concerned with establishing that what we were doing was art. It was one of the major ideas at the time, because it obviously looked so different than, you know, the other things that were normally in the museums. And it was, I mean, Duchamp, everybody, you know, it was for quite a while already, it had been a concern. I knew that this, for one thing, my piece was given away. It was given away, most of the people were strangers. It used to get written about a lot, like in different parts of the country in newspapers. People would write the papers, they'd send their addresses to me. I would immediately put them on the mailing list. So it was like a gift. All the things that the commercial world of art does not accept as serious work. Would I consider it if it hadn't been a museum? If it hadn't gotten into the museum, would I have considered it art? Yes, I considered it art from the beginning. It was part of the, as I say, because it was one of the, it was practically a platitude at the time that we were concerned with establishing it as art. And again, not for egotistical reasons, but because this was our philosophical position. Does that make sense?
I think...
Did I answer the question? Oh, I'm looking at you. Jesus, I didn't even know if you were the guy who asked the question.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Well, I go to galleries, museums all
Could
the
you
time.
talk louder?
Yes, I go to museums and galleries all the time, and so I'm always interested in the relationship between art and craft. And so one of the things that makes it, for a layman, I'm not a visual artist, one of the things that makes it difficult is trying to assess the element of craft, or is craft not an element in the kind of art that you
Well, he
create?
metaphorically deals with issues like that. Maybe you want to answer that, because the idea of craft, I don't really know what you mean.
Neither do I, so
Oh. Maybe you can explain.
Well,
we could start at the beginning. Does one need to be trained to create the art that you do?
You mean trained like in the early pictures, those marvelous photographs in your show where
Well, you
there
were
was
showing-
the
you
studio
were
and
showing
people are sitting
sculptures.
around in 1932
We
drawing.
saw
and
pictures
Julian's-
of sculptures in which of a sculptor sculpting something. So it was not only the thought or the ideation of what he was doing, but also the technical accomplishment and performance in order to create a marble statue.
Right, but
so
I'm not,
that's
I
what
don't
I would
make
call
marble
craft.
statues.
So that's
what,
what I call craft.
what the fuck do I have to do with marbles?
So
I
I'm
mean,
just
why do I have
asking.
to know
I'm not
how?
challenging. I'm simply asking.
I don't want to make marbles.
What I found actually quite interesting was how the work at the time could not be, I mean, it was denied the way it may because it was not sculpture and working with, and what Robin, in fact, this sort of cross boundaries, you know, of work produced across boundaries, you know, that doesn't have a categorization, but in fact contaminates everything around it, you know, performance and, you know, photography and sculpture and,
Is
you know,
contaminated by what? By each other?
I would think so. I mean,
using the word contamination, not like a disease. You're using it
like a dissemination in a certain way. But it is, yes, yeah,
It doesn't work.
it works.
Oh, it does? Oh, okay. Yeah, you're using it actually. It's rather charming, I think, to use the word that way.
But
Yes.
it is. It has that kind of connotation. I do want to bring that, you know, that virus notion. You know,
Yes,
that
which-
viral
yes,
idea. I do
yes,
want to bring
which-
that. I'm
Yes,
not-
well,
yeah.
it fits in with
Yeah.
a lot of the war
Right,
metaphors that I use.
Question, Mitra.
Thank you both. It's always a great opportunity to hear artists actually speak about their work. I have a quick question for Robin. It's my understanding that all the pieces we saw tonight were done in South Africa. And so my question is, now that you're living in Berlin, how has that changed your practice, the way you think about your practice, and in particular because you talked about the geographic?
Yes, interesting question because you know, living in Berlin has become also quite difficult in terms of accessing public space. And I really struggle to work in the public realm in a city like Berlin. Besides the kind of police atmosphere of the city and the kind of, how can I say, an oversaturation of a kind of European city, I do find that the space is quite difficult to access. So I use Berlin now as a place to accumulate ideas. It's a place where I am able to think differently, analytically about my process. And, you know, for many years I never had a studio. And just over the last couple of years I had no choice but to have a studio space. And the studio space has even become an interesting space for me too now in Berlin because I'm able to rehearse. It's a rehearsal space. I'm able to rehearse various forms, various ideas, various drawing processes in a studio. But I still go back to South Africa at least 3-4 times a year, and I still go back and I make these works in South Africa. The reason is because I'd like to reclaim that space. And I think this idea of self-motivation, of going back and reclaiming a kind of geographical space, it's very personal, but it's also this kind of obligation that I have as a young South African. So it's very much in my social fabric to somehow go back and to still work as I've done for many years. And you know, in Berlin is a city that is contaminated with graffiti art and street art. And as much as I align myself with street art, I don't consider myself a graffiti artist. I'm not trying to challenge graffiti art in any way. But I am actually kind of somehow, yes. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, you're doing a good job. So, yeah, Berlin does, you know, has created a kind of geographical conflict in my practice. But instead of, you know, being caught up with this kind of issue. I've rather allowed myself to embrace this conflict and see where it takes me and how I can use that as a way to develop my ideas from pure performative street works into sculpture, into other forms. And I think that's quite healthy for as an emerging artist.
Robin, I also have a question for you. Speak up. I've been following your work probably for the last 7 years, and really appreciated the way your career developed and so on. And I just saw the latest work from 2010, and my first reaction was really negative. I was really put off by the latest work. Well, why this?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Why this sudden? Where's this intellectualism that you're putting right into the picture coming from? Where's this interest of sudden?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely coming from living years in living so long now in Europe. I mean, I think it's difficult for me to, as much as I'm trying to sidestep this kind of influence. You know what I'm saying? As long as I'm trying to sidestep maybe Western discourse, you're saying, or this intellectual situation?
Well,
is that what you're referring to?
I was always really appreciating your work for the sort of childish playfulness.
Yes.
As you're saying, the 2008 work for sort of flattening the walls, this poetic, philosophical aspect. Like, but this is just a personal comment. I don't need this intellectualism of the chair, the Barcelona chair.
Yeah. I mean,
because I don't know if the viewer, if the audience will see that. I think
yes.
we appreciate.
This is my responsibility. I'm trying to challenge the audience, especially someone like yourself, who have you already have defined me. So I'm saying to you, you know what? Let me see if I can challenge you in terms of how you perceive my work. Because if I'm not challenging you, that means I'm not developing as a young artist. You know what? I'm not afraid to fail, and a lot of artists are afraid to fail. I'm saying, you know what? I'm gonna challenge myself. I'm gonna see if I have the intellectual capacity to engage or to critique a kind of Western ideology that has somehow pushed me towards a geographical periphery, having to go back to South Africa to make a work. So I've embraced from my early pieces the notion of drawing in a very childlike manner. I've embraced the notion of playfulness. I've embraced the notion of street art. However, I'm not young enough to know everything. So I'd rather take my audience, this audience tonight, I'm telling you, come with me on this artistic journey, and we'll see where we can go together. Maybe 7 years from now, we can have a different conversation. And that's what's interesting. That's my responsibility.
Yeah, over there.
I'm finished with that.
This question is.
I see you're doing a good job.
This question is for Eleanor. I know you've sort of touched on it, but one question I've had from the beginning is knowing that you were developing your work in the beginning at a time when the art world had taken a conceptual turn, and you were making works that weren't traditional art objects, but also working in a time when there was a very anti-subjective tendency where talking about experience maybe was not considered the goal. To be a feminist artist, I mean, you keep talking about the war. Well, you keep mentioning a war, but not really talking about it. If you could just touch on that a little bit and your experience as an artist, a female artist, creating work at that time.
My hearing is not the greatest. So you were talking about extending the metaphor of war, which was actually an experience, not so much a metaphor, but extending that towards my experience as a feminist or as a woman. Is that?
I mean, I don't know if you have to use the word
could you talk
better.
about
Sorry, I don't know if you have to use the word war necessarily, but your experience as an artist touching on feminist issues at a time when a lot of these kind of subjective concerns were being removed from art making.
Okay, now were you talking about, again, because I missed part of it, I'm sorry. I have a little trouble hearing. Now, if you would say the same thing a little bit louder, I would be very appreciative.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault.
Just basically just talk about your experiences as a feminist artist, creating at a time when
Okay.
a lot of this content wasn't considered a
Of course.
priority in the work.
Of course. Well, that's a complex issue. Yes, as a woman artist, it really was much more complex, much more complicated, and also in different parts of the country, because the feminism in the art world in New York was quite different than the feminism of the art world in Southern California, which was much more open and friendly and nicer than the nastier feminism. And a lot of these people are my friends in New York, so I'm not calling individuals nasty, but it was like the rest of the environment in New York, which was nastier, okay? And also partly because people paid attention to New York, where now the Getty is now paying for a lot of money to set up a huge range of shows of, well, they say Los Angeles, but essentially Southern California artwork from 1945 to 1980, because the art world was so New York-centric that the magazines, everything, that there is a large part of what was happening in California that was ignored. Now, of course, I think they tend to ignore American artists altogether, but that's a different issue, okay? But so I think that was always a problem for us. As a woman, yeah, it was hard. I was lucky. I found like Ronald Feldman early, and I actually had galleries before. Don't ask me why with my weird work that I did, but I did. When I traveled to do art like the boys, the conceptual boys, who were my friends, some of them dear close friends, not so close, but like people I liked, they had it easy. They would put their stuff in a little suitcase and go from Italy to France to, wherever, and they were welcomed. I remember sitting in a gallery doing a show, no, it wasn't Geneva, I think it was Milano, I don't remember. And all the women who were, the girls who worked there, they were young girls, and then some other people, other women, they just wanted to talk to me, and they were just so curious about me. And when they found out that I had a child, I don't know how old he would have been. How old would he have been? About 5 or something. And I left him with his father. You know, what, his father was going to starve him to death? You know, they said, I would never do that. Okay, we're talking 72, 73. You know, I mean, there was an alienation. I felt alone and I was taking part in among my peers, fellow conceptual artists. People would often say in those days that it's self-indulgent. And until autobiographical and self-transformational works, until, you should excuse me, the boys started picking up on it. And there were some people who were very supportive of what people, the feminists and the women artists, not all women artists, that were interested in. But yeah, that complicated the issue. In my case, it doubly complicated it, even among feminists, because I was so theatrical. I was so committed to narrative, which was a dirty, dirty word. All the things that now in postmodernism everyone thinks is wow, is, well, unless now they're calling it post-colonialism, I don't know, but postmodernism, all the words that got very popular when I was doing them were not, and that further, I think, complicated my issue, and always put me in this kind of mood like this. In fact, that is so much of a part of my self-image, that when I was looking through my archive, because it's being sold, when I looked through some of these letters from people I thought hated me, and I remember like this, and actually they wrote very nice letters to me, you know, and I was horrified. David knows. I didn't even want to look at those, and here I'm selling them for, you know, like, I don't want to talk about it's in process, but, you know, for a lot of money, and I can't look. I don't want to look because my self-image is fucking up. And at the same time, my work is, I know, it's plays with charm and comedy and all sorts of things, but it's dark underneath. So, like all of us, I'm a creature of total, you know.
We will take 2 more questions.
Yeah, I'm interested in the idea of, we're talking about the document as a manifestation of the work, and I'm interested in where you think the work lies. If it's actually just, not just, but if it's the documentation of the work that's important to you, or the act itself, the relationship kind of between the performance, the immediate, the happening, contra a document that relates to a certain time and space.
To whom is this addressed?
It's
To
sort
whom?
of addressed to all of you.
Yes.
because I think it's
You want to try this?
Well, you know, it's a question. We since the Museum of Modern Art opened a new department, which is the Department of Performance. We had this sort of behind the doors, closed doors sort of forums with artists and performers and scholars of performance art discussing these issues. And all I can tell you is that we have different generation of artists, some pioneers of performance art, and there is not one single. That's why I ask to whom you are addressing the question. Not one person agrees with the other on this issue. So it's the same situation like with a score. You know, is the score the original work? Is it the person who performs it, that moment of the performance? Is like, what is a relic? What is a live, event? What I'm referring in the exhibition, if we are talking about my exhibition, are where situations where the photograph has a creative and interpretative, in addition to the documentary role. It's not just a document. Even when, say, Robert Smithson or other people who are considered it a document, it has more than just that documentary value. And for the most part, a lot of the works that you see in the exhibition are conceived for the camera. Like some of the best surrealist sculptures are photographs. They don't exist as sculptures. They were made, constructed, just to be photographed.
That was the point I was trying to make, that for me it's a question of intentionality that really binds that together.
That's why I'm saying there is not one single answer to your question in a certain way.
But that's why I find it difficult to engage with. I love the exhibition, but I find it difficult to engage with an exhibition that doesn't raise that question and discusses kind of the differences between those boundaries.
No, the exhibition does discuss that, actually. That's all it does. It does through and through. The exhibition is discussing it at different levels, Though for me, one of the starting points of that show was I did my dissertation on Brancusi. And it was on the sculpture, it was not on the photographs, And that's like the second room that you see into the show. The first is an introductory sort of to various possibilities of the functions of photography, what photography really does, But the second one is where the show really starts. It starts with Brancusi and Duchamp, So for me, the way that I really understood Brancusi was through the photographs through his photographs of sculptures, because they give a completely different understanding of his work than if you were to just go to the 5th floor at the Museum of Modern Art and look at the sculptures themselves. And I won't go into that right now, although I would love to, because it's something that is very close to my heart. But I'd rather keep it within the topic of this discussion.
I thought that was really interesting.
Sorry.
Well, just talking about Brancusi's photographs of
Yeah.
sculpture.
Yeah.
Because I had never really known about that before, and I just think that's really interesting.
Well,
It'd be nice if we go into just.
okay, sure, my pleasure. Brancusi had lots and lots of photographer friends, from Stiglitz and Steichen, who offered him the first show in New York, to Man Ray, who helped him buy, photographic equipment and set up a dark room, to Berenice Abbott, who studied sculpture under Brancusi, and so on and so on. Yet he refused to let any of them really photograph his work, saying that he was the only person who knew how to do it. And his photographs were full of sort of errors, He was really going against the grain of traditional photography. So there are all kinds of apocryphal, stories about how people were photographing his work, how he was chasing them out of the studio because of that. But there are two types of photographs. When you read the literature on Brancusi, he's described usually in the classical literature of Brancusi, he's described as a Platonist sculptor, as a sculptor of pure form, as an idealist, and of sorts. And so it's interesting when you look at the photographs, there are two types of photographs usually. One, the studio views, and one of single works. And the ones of single works are what are called sort of the photoradieuses, or radiating pictures, where he is sort of calculating the angle of incidence of how the light hits the polished sculpture, the polished bronze. So he really explodes the gestalt. He explodes that perfect form. That's one thing, which you don't necessarily see in the sculpture itself. The reason why he was doing that is one of the, we are talking about infinity, and but one of, the endless column, it deals with infinity. That was one way to show infinity, is not to show finite form, is to explode it, otherwise it's contained, it's gestaltic. So that was one way. And the other one was the so-called group mobile, where there are these images of his studio where he's perpetually making sculpture in flux. He's shifting several sculptures and bases and pedestals in close proximity to create something extremely scenographic. And that's, again, something you don't see, because when you go to a museum, you see a platform with all the sculptures there, nothing changes, nothing shifts. Show movement, but also show different type of groupings, positions. So, all right, one more question, and that shouldn't be addressed to me. It should be addressed to the artist.
I can yank from
I wanted to address or ask you what your opinion was, or how you dealt with the Nike commercial that came out. I'm sure you're well. I didn't hear how it all turned out, and I was just wondering the appropriation of the reference.
I don't know what it is.
Do you mind explaining that? Because I don't quite know.
Sure. The Nike commercial starts out with someone, it's kind of like street art. A kid runs out and draws a staircase with chalk on the street, and grabs a skateboard, runs off frame, and then kind of skates back in off the top of the stairs, and then falls to the bottom of the stairs, skates off.
No, I think he ramps off this chalk staircase. He ramps. He doesn't fall.
Well, no,
he
ramps, and he clears the stairs all the way down and lands on the bottom, picks up the skateboard and walks off, and just looks at the camera.
an obvious reference or appropriation of your work, I think. And I don't know if there was any dialogue or if there was any...
You want clarity?
Exactly. Yes. What happened through that situation?
I have no idea. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't know. Some guys did that.
And there was no follow-up with
I
that
have no idea. I'm sorry.
from you? Okay.
I didn't. Yeah, it was done, and.
Well, how do you
but
feel?
anything-
How do you feel
How do I
about
feel
that?
about it? I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. It was a good ad. Yeah.
I thought it was quite interesting because what started happening was that a lot of blogs were picking this up, and a lot of people were talking about it with regards to this Nike commercial ripping of my work, but it's difficult. You can't control everything. You can't control situations like that, and I thought it was interesting that people are conscious of it, and maybe someone who doesn't really go to museums, for example, will through a blog, through the internet, maybe discover my work. Because what I think people were telling me was that I ripped off someone else.
You ripped off Nike, right?
So, I don't know. I'm sorry.
They say nothing's new under the sun, right?
Nothing's new.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
I want to thank all of you for coming, and Robin, and our wonderful curator, and Eleanor, and the articulations that took place. I also want to thank Beatrice Gross, who is the creative interlocutor of this event. And she doesn't know it, but we named this theater after her. It's called Beatrice, in case you didn't know. And this dialogue will continue in many facets, and it just proves the multifaceted roles of photography